Warning, this post contains some graphic description and content. If you have a weak stomach or an inability to handle objects of a poking nature, you have been warned.
It's come to that point. The enemy forces you have been tasked to spy on have captured you. And now, instead of you feeding information about them to your commanders, it is you, the enemy, who is trying to wring information out of. You try to resist for as long as possible to their repeated questioning. And when it becomes apparent that their questions are not getting them any answers, the interrogators resort to using methods of torture in order to coerce the information out of you. While there are both physical and psychological methods of torture, for the time period we are focusing on, which is medieval or the Middle Ages, the torture methods described here will all be of the physical variety, as psychological methods of torture only came into existence in the 1950s.
Torture has been used to procure evidence from people since what seems like forever. In the case of slaves, their testimonies were considered well-founded only if those testimonies were obtained through torture. This could have been due to the poor image and severe trust issues people of that time had in slaves. According to historical records, the possibly earliest endeavor to organize laws in terms of crimes and corresponding punishments was close to the end of King Hammurabi's governance. In an effort to ensure everyone under his power understood his 282 laws, the king had them engraved on a 6 feet tall stone column. He even had several duplicates of this column constructed in big cities throughout his empire so that everybody knew about it. Perhaps the most surprising aspect of his laws is the fairness of it. The law calls for people to prove a guilty act before the person in power charges him or her. This is quite similar to what happens nowadays actually. Most of the time though, the punishments back then followed the principle of an eye for an eye. For example, a person who broke the bones of another person will have his own broken in the same places. Crazy, right? I know! This principle was known as the Tylo. There was even a law which stated that if a physician killed or maimed a patient during the course of his treatment, the doctor would have his hands chopped off. Yeah, gory as it sounds, it's actually a long-sighted move that would prevent malpractice henceforth. Oh. Hey, you want to know something interesting? What? Personal vendettas were disallowed back then. Really? Wow! Yeah, the abuse of both captives and females were also prohibited. In fact, women were given rights such as protection from rape. Quoting Donnelly and Veal from their 2011 published book, the punishment for sexual assault is castration for the guilty party. Even though I shouldn't find this amusing, their belief is that if a woman who is accused of adultery is in fact innocent, she would safely find her way to the opposite bank after being tossed into the Euphrates River. The gods will ensure she obtains safety if they thought she was guilt-free. In usual cases, the torture of an individual was a clandestine operation. However, when the powers to be decided that a public spectacle be made out of an individual, torturous executions were organized. They appealed to the public by such a great deal that public holidays were often declared and free penances given to spectators to ensure large attendances. Wow! Now, we will talk about some methods that were used back then to torture people. Have fun!
Specimen 1. Ferro pillory, also known as Spanish mantle or the drunkard's cloak. The earliest known mention of this device dates back to 1634 in Delft, Netherlands. It was first mentioned in Travels in Holland by Sir William Brereton.
In this method, a barrel is fitted over the entire body with the head sticking out from a hole in the top. The person is kept locked in the barrel, which forces him to kneel in his own filth and in some cases suffer extremes of hot or cold. For a short time, this was merely unpleasant, but prolonged confinement could cause death through hunger or thirst, or scapism, allowing or encouraging insects to breed on and feed on victims' flesh. The defenseless individual's feces accumulated within the container, attracting ever more insects, which would eat and breed within his or her exposed and often gangrenous flesh.
Eating the victim would often be allowed each day, in some cases to prolong the torture, so that dehydration or starvation did not provide him or her with the release of death. Delirium would typically set in after a few days. Death, when it eventually occurred, was probably due to a combination of dehydration, starvation, and septic shock.
Specimen 2, the brazen bull. This was used in the Middle Ages in Central Europe. The brazen bull was invented in ancient Greece by Paralus of Athens. Paralus proposed his idea of a painful means of execution to Pheroras, the tyrant of Argogas. Pheroras liked the idea of the brazen bull and had one made.
The bull was made wholly of brass. It was hollow and furnished with a door in the side. When a victim was placed inside the brazen bull, he or she was roasted to death by a fire lit underneath. A system of tubes made the victim's scream sound like an infuriated bull, and also made the bull's muzzle snort smoke.
Once finished, Pheroras ordered it to be tested on Perilau himself. Pheroras was the tyrant of Argogas in Sicily from 570 to 554 BCE. Disgusted by Perilau and his invention, he ordered Perilau into the bull to test it, then locked him in. Before Perilau died, Pheroras drew him out and threw him off a hill, killing Perilau. Pindar, the ancient Greek poet, mentions Phalaris and the bronze bull in Phthyian 1, published in 470 BCE. Later, in 146 BCE, Scipio Africanus the Younger returns various works of art that Carthage had robbed from Sicily, among which the bronze bull is assumed to be to their owners.
Specimen 3, the chair of torture. This was a torture device that was added to dungeons in the Middle Ages. It was used until the 1800s in Europe.
Also known as the Judas chair, this chair was layered with 500 to 1,500 spikes on every surface with tight straps to restrain its victim. Made of iron, it can also contain spaces for heating elements beneath the seat. It was often used to scare people into giving confessions as they watched others being tortured.
Specimen 4, the Judas cradle, originating in 16th century Spain. The Judas cradle began to be used during 16th century Spain, after the institution of Inquisition was established in the country. Thus, it was during the late medieval times that the device was most commonly used. Although mostly used for religious purposes, it was also used against the political opponents of the time. During this torture, the criminal was first positioned in the waist harness above the sharp pyramid-shaped seat. The point was then inserted into the anus or vagina of the person, and then the person was slowly lowered by a system of ropes.
Sometimes, various weights were tied to the legs to dramatically increase the pain and eventually tear muscular tissues of the orifice. Among other methods, the victim was made to repeatedly fall on the pyramid to immensely increase the pain.
This torture could last from a few hours to several days. The device was never washed, so the torture could often lead to painful infection or even death. Sometimes the victim was raised with ropes and given monetary respite, but this was not done out of mercy but only to prolong the pain and misery of the victim.
Specimen 5, the thumbscrew, originating in medieval Europe. The thumbscrew was one of the most prevalent interrogatory torture devices of medieval Europe. It was a simple vice with crushing bars often lined with sharp metal teeth. The crushing of the fingers was achieved by turning the handle on the top, slowly pushing its toothed crushing bars together.
One of the most common victims of thumbscrew torture were alleged heretics or blasphemers. The inquisitors first attempted to extract confessions from these victims by presenting them for trial and sentencing. So they made use of the thumbscrew to extract false confessions from these victims. It was used to slowly crush the victim's thumbs or other fingers.
This torture method was primarily used to extract confessions from the prisoners, as it was both extremely painful and very lasting. In most cases, the use of the thumbscrew was very effective, and many innocent persons were forced to confess many crimes they didn't commit. Since there were no laws governing the use of torture tools in obtaining confessions, the use of thumbscrew was common, and its aid in getting confessions wasn't considered illegal or in any way damaging to the case of the Inquisition.